We are in Cape Town, South Africa, with 4 members of the Elders Group and an audience waiting to cross-question them. Welcome to South2North. Hello, and welcome to South2North. I'm Redi, very thrilled to be back on the show, this time with a special edition from the District 6 Museum in Cape Town. On the walls around us hang historical documents bearing testament to the forced relocation of thousands under the apartheid regime. Today and next week, we'll be here discussing some of the world's most pressing problems with leaders from the distinguished group of elders. I'm also delighted to be joined by 200 people from the global south and further afield. They are here today to question some of the world's most influential voices. But who are the elders, and can they make a difference? On our panel today, we have veteran anti-apartheid campaigner, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who chaired South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Pakistani human rights activist and Supreme Court lawyer, Hina Jilani, who's among the newer elders. Doctor by training and former Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Bruntland, and former UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan. Well, this is your conversation with the elders. Let's get started with your questions. We start with Colin Lawrence. You have a question for the elders.
Society needs role models. Who are the ethical global leaders today?
They're sitting here. Let's start with you, Mr. Annan.
When we talk of ethical leaders, I think we should be looking at those leaders, those men and women in position of authority and leadership who strive to do what is right, who also realize that the power they hold in the office that they occupy is not something personal. Is something they hold in trust for the people. And they should know that they are there to serve and handle the problems and issues of the people. And when I'm talking of leadership, I'm not talking mainly of political leadership. It can be at the corporate level in any other situation, to be able to understand the concern and the need of others, to be able to empathize, and to think of tomorrow, to think of the future. And constantly also ask yourself, what should I be doing? What should we be doing? How can I help? Not this is what I do.
Do we have such leaders, Mr. Annan?
We do have leaders. Don't ask me to name them because I can name one and offend 50. But there are leaders, and I think I've given you a definition of the type of leaders. There are some around. I think we are sometimes too pessimistic.
Dr. Bruntland, who are the ethical leaders?
Well, you know, in addition to what Kofi Annan just answered you, I think to be bold and to have the courage of your convictions and to think long-term, not short-term and political expediency. That's characters that I think are coupled to real leaders. Mm-hmm. I would not name any either.
Ms. Jilani, same question to you.
I would say ethical leaders are those who understand what is relevant to the people's need, are able to take decisions regardless of what the consequences would be, and then be clever enough to make sure that the consequences are addressed and have good strategies to address the consequences.
Archbishop, why do I get a feeling you won't be shy to name names?
Well, yes, I think that I would almost have 100% concurrence if I say, well, we mean leaders like Madiba. Under the apartheid regime, we had leaders in the so-called Bantustans who were imposed on us. And almost universally, people rejected them because they knew who their leaders were, and most of their leaders were either in jail or in exile.
The next question, I believe, comes from Hilton Nyirenda. Hilton, go ahead, please.
The Elders Forum has been in existence for a while. My question to the esteemed elders here is, what would you regard as key achievements to date?
I think we have, as a group, we've been able to offer some advice. You take an issue like child marriage. We've been very active in that and really put that, given it real impetus in the discussions around the world. We've been able to focus attention on issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've been engaged in Myanmar and Cote d'Ivoire. We are concerned about economic and development issues. And today we are engaged in the Syrian crisis. You should also know that individual members of the elders group have been very active in seeking solutions to some of these very issues. Lakhdar Brahimi, who is not able to be here with us today, is in Syria trying to help resolve the Syrian crisis. I myself made an attempt earlier before I left in frustration because I felt the Security Council was not honoring its commitment to me that they would stay united and maintain a sustained effort to get a peaceful settlement.
Dr. Bruntland?
The whole area of discrimination against women is linked to the choice also to focus on child marriage, which he mentioned, because it is mostly the girl child that is being affected by this discriminatory practice, but also sustainable development in a broader sense and climate change, which we have discussed here in Cape Town. We will be continuing to support as much as we can, the work of all those who are active now to try to take seriously and that we are all responsible to deal with the climate issue before future generations are fully hit by our mistakes.
Does that satisfy you? Are you happy with that? Ms. Jilani.
I'm too new to the elders group to say very much about the successes of the initiatives and endeavors, but I can say one thing. What attracted me to this group and why I felt so privileged to be a part of it is that, in principle, I think that it's a rare thing that you establish a group which is of people who have experience either in power or in other roles that they have performed in public offices, and they are able to be to sit back, to be more objective in terms of looking at the situations that they are dealing with, having no stake or interest apart from the interest of humanity. And I think that's very important for me, that you don't just speak truth to power, but you also show wisdom to power.
You may be new to the group, but you've previously said, I quote, "I've always had this feeling that if you see injustice, you have to speak out against it. If not, you are not in a position to complain." Archbishop?
These people tend to be modest. As you know, my middle name is immodesty. And I'm quite ready to, I think that there's been a great deal that has happened. Some places could probably have gone up in flames hadn't there been the intervention of these people, because some of the work that is done is somebody picking up a telephone and when you lift your telephone on the other side and it says, this is Jimmy Carter, well, you sit up and take notice. That a great deal of the work is often below the radar.
But I have to ask a question of you, Mr. Annan. We've spoken about interventions, but it seems to me that the world leadership has not come to a point where it prevents these atrocities. We seem to react after the fact.
Prevention is always better if we can get it done, which implies that we need to act early. We have to have early warning systems in place and move very quickly to nip the problem in the bud before it explodes. And you are right, as an international community, we are not very good at that. We often come in when the explosion has taken place.
Rwanda, Kosovo.
Yes, we have Rwanda, we have Kosovo, you can mention Syria, you can go on. But we are also all human. Nations are made up of individuals. If couples have a problem and you go in and you want to try and help them, they say, leave it to us, we can handle it. It's our internal matter, until it gets hopeless. And then they keep rushing around for help. We behave collectively the same way. Often people do not, even when you have early warning systems, they don't want to listen until it really explodes.
Reverend Professor Peter Story, where are you? You have a question?
Thank you. My question is, how do we establish ethical leadership in countries, for instance, like Kenya and South Africa, where the heads of state themselves have very serious accusations of corruption or crime hanging over their heads?
It's one of the most painful things, having to speak out. Sometimes, people might have thought that we had a kind of strange joy in those dark days when you spoke out against this or that particular evil. I can tell you it is one of the most agonizing things. And I think, that one hopes that there would be those who are ready to speak truth to power. But we also have to try to indicate that you are not speaking out of a position of hostility. It is because you have such a deep love for your country, and you know that it has the capacity. Let's talk about our country. This country is one where nobody ought to go to bed hungry. We have that capacity. It's a country where no single child ought to be struggling. 20 years down the line, and you look and you say, no, it can't be true that there are classrooms that look like pigsties. It's not that you enjoy pointing that out. It is out of a deep hurt. To think that we now occupy the position where the gap between rich and poor is the widest in the world. It's agonizing. Because, we oldies thought that, we would be sitting and watching you young ones getting into your own. But no.
Many of you are saying it's true. Are you just as disappointed as the Archbishop? Let's move on. Eric de Ryder, You're here in front, yes?
In cases where states do abuse power, in particular in Syria, is it appropriate for a military response?
In fact, Dr. Bruntland, I want to start with you because you have previously said that hospitals and doctors in Syria have become the target of warring factions. We'll start with you with that answer.
That question is very broad and very central to international collaboration. It is the question, you cannot exclude the use of military power, at the outset, because there are situations where even the international community and the Security Council as such decides that that is the right thing to do. Now, however, before that, there is always the main question of trying to intervene in time, of doing preventive actions. And by the way, while the Secretary General at that time was in office, one of the things that we really worked on and that he took initiative on was the responsibility to protect, which means civil populations have the right for protection also outside, from forces outside their own country. So we are all responsible to be taking action and to take seriously what kind of decision needs to be made to avoid human suffering and to have conflicts becoming worse, to prevent them in the first place.
Yeah.
You want to come in there, Mr. Annan?
Yes, no, I agree with everything that Dr. Bruntland has said, but use of force cannot be resorted to lightly. I would also say that as somebody who had worked with UN peacekeepers and the United Nations itself, we tend to listen a lot to diplomats and politicians when it comes to declaration of war. Before I got into that department of peacekeeping, I accepted the traditional wisdom that declaration of war is too serious to be left to the generals. I walked out with a different insight, that when it comes to declaration of war and use of force, you better listen to the generals. They ask all the tough questions. Do you know what you're going to do to my boys? Do you know how many people are going to get killed? Whom am I to kill and why? And where does it end? And so we need to have a very sound and broad debate before we resort to use of force. But this responsibility to protect puts responsibility not only on the leaders of the country, but on those of us outside the country. Because until then, we could have said this is an internal affair, it has nothing to do with us. But under the responsibility to protect, we are being told some situations are so shameful that we cannot stand back and say we do nothing.
I want to bring you in here as a human rights activist, because often there are people who are still bleeding. Their wounds run deep. They feel that justice was not done. Is that what happens in global governance, where we reach a veneer of peace and stability, but the people who've been affected by the wars, by the discrimination, have to live with those wounds?
I think if you don't deal with the past in a manner in which it doesn't block your going forward, then the peace will never be sustainable. And I deeply believe that there is no peace without justice. Nevertheless, I do believe that there are ways and means of achieving the goal of justice by methods and means which do not take up all your energies in dealing with the past, and as a new nation or in a period of transition, take away your capacity to move forward. A new nation or rebuilding of the nation takes a lot of resources, energies, etc. So you have to keep looking forward. The whole question of impunity and accountability must always be thought of in the context of, are we going to give the rule of law a bad name by half justice because we don't have the capacity at that particular point, for instance, to do real justice and turn justice into vindictiveness? So I do believe that there are several factors that must determine the scope of transitional justice and dealing with the past. But very strongly believe that, yes, past has to be an important factor in any kind of endeavor to move forward.
Our next question, Aurea Delfina, you have a question right at the back there.
Thank you. So my question relates to the recent Westgate attacks in Kenya. The government was heavily criticized for a lack of transparency. I wanted to know from the panel if this is a justifiable act of leadership, the lack of information in this case.
Some of the criticisms were a bit exaggerated. I mean, it was a terrorist attack which appears to have taken the government by surprise. And there are those who believe that the government should have been able to anticipate it and stop it, and claiming that there were information beforehand. I'm not aware of this. But of course, when you have these kinds of attacks, there's always quite a lot of second guessing. The security forces seem to have made some mistakes. There are information coming out which indicates they could have handled it better. But whether all the criticism is fair is difficult to say. But the government has been trying its best to try and deal with the situation and take steps to ensure that such events are not repeated. And it's not easy for any government. So we have to demand better security, but also handle it with sympathetic understanding.
Nobody is ever satisfied with the actions of the government. It's never quite enough. What do you say to that question?
You know, I have to say, I was sitting thinking, we had a terrible act happening more than 2 years ago in Norway. Peaceful Norway, where no one was expecting anything like this to happen. A relatively young man in a killing spree on an island with young people. He planned it, and he did it on his own, killing altogether 77 people. Now, of course, in the first weeks after this tragedy, everyone was focused on the loss, on the terrible tragedy of the young people and their families and their friends. But gradually, as weeks and months passed, the focus came on the Norwegian police, on the Norwegian government, on the Norwegian legal system. Had there been surveilling sufficiently, you know, any type of exchange that this young man had? And we have had a long period of discussing every angle of this. Because in a society like Norway, no stone is left unturned. You know, we all have the right to know what happened and what didn't happen, and who are to blame or not to blame. But it remains so that there were weaknesses in the timing of what the small police office in that little part of Norway, how quickly they were able to respond when this young man was killing, you know, indiscriminately on that island. It took too long time, and we all regretted it. But I think basically few people feel that the government of Norway, or the, you know, generally speaking, you know, there was a lot of blame to be given. It was a tragedy, and every stone is turned to try to prevent even better any future kind of incident.
Can you believe it? We have to wrap our discussion. I must thank our panelists, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Thank you very much for your time today. Ms. Hina Jilani, we appreciate your contribution to our discussion. Dr. Gro Harlem Bruntland, a pleasure to have you with us on South to North. And of course, Kofi Annan, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. And thank you. You've been a wonderful, wonderful audience. Thank you very much for your questions as well. Well, that brings us to the end of this special program. Do join us next week for more from the elders. Please do remember to tweet your questions, comments, and opinions to @AJ South to North, or find us on Facebook. From me, Redi in Cape Town, wherever you are watching tonight, thank you and goodbye.